Hello and welcome to the Paul Santos Show. We have a big one lined up tonight. I mean, a real biggie. First of all, we'd like to pass our thoughts and prayers to each and every one of you during these challenging times. But as you know, here we try to separate from that, highlight the talented, interesting, and entertaining from our area, and maybe have a few laughs in between where we can. Tonight, we are talking about the amazing, and I mean the amazing career of journalist and sports historian, waiting in the wings, Mr. Ralph Hickok, right over there. Yeah. Plus, to do a special duet with our own Chops Turner, Mr. Glenn Noons.
Yeah, Glenn's in the house. He's the man.
And of course, the sidekick of the century, Mr. Chops Turner. Right here, ladies and gentlemen. Well, don't forget to let us know where you are watching from. We always like to hear that. And before we get Ralph out here, we got to catch up on the news, Chops. We got to catch up on the news. Catch up on the news. Well, you know, we're going to start with a great story tonight, a good story, a feel-good story about good policing. That's what we need.
All right,
well, a New Bedford police officer by the name of Mark Conley, on a very hot day, bought ice cream at Brooklawn Park for 97 kids. Wow. Wasn't that nice? Let's hear it for Officer Conley. Yeah, getting some. But I did want to mention that right after that, he wrote out 97 citations for illegally parked cars. No, that's... Also picked up 97 munchkins on the way back to the station. No, that's...
Oh, man.
The police have a sense of humor there, right? We like to... sense of humor. Well, speaking of the police, the environmental police, the U.S. Coast Guard, and a good Samaritan on Buzzards Bay saved the life of a leatherback sea turtle in distress in the ocean right here. See that?
Wow.
That's good. You know, I mean, save the whales, save the turtles, it's all good stuff. You know, I heard that the turtle wasn't breathing at first, so they had to give it a shell shock. Yeah.
Hey, man, a shell shock. You got him laughing over there.
Then to calm it down, they gave it some seaweed. It's just not that easy, Chops. It's not that easy. Well,
you're doing good.
Our friends at Fun 107 reported that the corn man hadn't been selling corn in Fairhaven from the back of his pickup truck anymore. Now, at first, I thought he got a shucking, but it turns out that he retired. Okay?
They
gun like that one, yeah. But anyway, there was now an empty space where the pickup truck used to be. There's a cornhole there, as a matter of fact.
A cornhole?
Yeah, cornhole. Well, did you lose your power last week, Chops?
No, mine stayed on. Fortunately.
Well, you had your power that way you could see.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they pull the plug on you. Yeah. Well, parts of New Bedford actually lost power for about an hour and a half. Now, once the power was restored, due to the shock of this, some of the kids from Generation Z, before going back to the video games, had to go to a safe space for a while to recover because they couldn't stand the fact that the power was gone for an hour and a half. I love Generation Z. I think Justin's Generation Z, isn't he? Yeah, he is. I'm sorry about that. Well, don't forget the Chops Turner Show, Sunday nights on the Chop Facebook page. And by the way, my wife and I stopped by Tomatoes on the way back from the Cape yesterday. Chops and Carlene Marshall, I mean, you guys sing so great together. We had a great time watching you guys. You guys are great.
Thank you.
And then you brought out an old standby, "You're one in a million, chance of a lifetime." And I'm like, how does he get down so low like that?
Oh, man,
Every once in a while, you got to show off the brass.
I learned from Glenn, man.
You got to show off the brass ones. Glenn can't get that low.
Yes, he can.
All right, well, later on, Chops is going to be discussing his new video shot in New York City, Enough is Enough. We're going to be talking about that. That's on YouTube. You can go to YouTube, type in Chops Turner, Enough is Enough, Trifecta. We're going to be talking all about that in a little bit. Well, our first guest tonight, as we said, is a terrific gentleman and a fantastic journalist. We welcome to our microphones Mr. Ralph Hickok. Welcome aboard, Ralph.
Thank you, all my fans.
I'm so glad to see you tonight. Yes, wall to wall over here in the studio. Well, I'm so glad to have you here tonight because we've been meaning to have you on for a while because your knowledge in the area of journalism, I mean, it is just such a wealth of knowledge. You've written books and everything. But let's get back to the beginning. Green Bay guy, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Green Bay, went to Green Bay East High School, which is the high school of Curly Lambeau, the founder of the Packers and longtime coach. And my dad was the I can't remember the term, but he worked for the Packers on weekends. He was the official scorer.
No, sir.
So I watched from the time I was 8 until I went to college. I was in the press box for every Green Bay home game, helping Dad with statistics and stuff. So
That must have been really exciting for a young kid.
yeah, it was. Unfortunately, the Packers had terrible teams in those days. I went to college and they hired Vince Lombardi, so that's like the story of my life.
Well, it's funny because when you mentioned the story to me originally, and I was like, wow, you get to see all those championship teams. You're like, no, that was before Vince Lombardi, right?
They had pretty bad teams when I was a kid, but
Once they got going, they were all right.
oh yeah, and they had good teams before too. But I was just born in the wrong time. So.
Well, I know you're a Harvard guy, right? We don't have too many Harvard guys around the studio too often, so tell me about that. You really love journalism.
Yeah, well, I went to Harvard. I was actually going to be an engineer. I thought I was, but after about a year of pretending that I was going to be an engineer, I always kind of knew I would be a writer, and so I switched to English Lit as a major after freshman year, and then went into the newspaper business after Harvard.
Right. And you actually stayed in the New England area?
Yeah, I worked at the Gloucester Daily Times for a while. I also worked for a newspaper in Lynn. I can't even remember the name. It was a strike newspaper because the Lynn Daily Evening Item had a strike going on, so the strikers formed their own newspaper, and I worked for them for a while.
Wow. How did you end up in New Bedford?
Well, I got a job. It was, simple as that. I was working, I was sports editor at a little newspaper in Ohio, Salina, Ohio, and I was on the Cape on vacation. I really wanted to get back to the East Coast, so I got an interview at the New Bedford Standard Times, and they hired me. So
That's great. And you actually came down here on a very memorable day.
yeah, I left Massachusetts for Ohio the day that JFK was inaugurated, and I left Ohio to come back to Massachusetts the day he was assassinated.
Wow, isn't that something?
November 22nd, 1963.
They always say, I remember where I was, right? Do you remember exactly where you were when you heard the news?
I was I was supposed to be done working at 11:30 after I put my sports pages together, but I hung around to say goodbye to people while they, put the rest of the newspaper together. And just as it was time to go to press and I was saying goodbye to everybody, the bulletin came in on the teletype that he had been shot. And I ended up working almost all afternoon tearing the old newspaper apart and putting a whole new one together. So.
And of course, eventually the afternoon, the news came in that he had passed away.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I found out later that my dad was doing exactly the same thing at the Green Bay Press-Gazette, where he was news editor, so.
Now, were you already here in Massachusetts before Lee Harvey Oswald got shot?
In fact, I watched it on TV and on that Sunday afternoon. Yeah, my first day in New Bedford, really.
Wow, isn't that something?
Yeah.
So tell me about your years in New Bedford. You were basically the editor of the Sunday magazine, which wasn't hard news. It was more like feature stories.
Oh, yeah. I worked in the Sunday department, so it was almost like putting out a weekly newspaper, just a Sunday paper. When I started, the magazine was called the Southeasterner, which is what they called a rotogravure section. And it was pretty much a graveyard for leftover photos. They'd cover some event where the photographers took 15 or 20 photos, and there'd be 2 of them in the regular newspaper, and the rest of them would get thrown into the magazine, and there was no real continuity to it. It was just a bunch of pictures with captions. And so when they made me, there was no editor, really, of the Sunday magazine. And so when they made me editor, one of my mission was to start filling it with some real editorial content. So I started doing a lot of photo stories. I worked with photographers, and I'd write the text, and of course they'd do the photos, and getting more substance, more text into the magazine.
So you were able to take something that was sort of like where the leftover news kind of went, and you built it into something that was really popular.
Well, I hope I did, yeah.
Yeah, I think you did, because people have told me.
And Actually, that went through. It was a Southeasterner. Then I can't even remember the sequence. I believe it became Panorama, and then Bowsprit. I think that was the sequence, but I'm not even
I can
sure.
remember when I was a kid, I remember that magazine and how popular it was and how, on a Sunday that was sort of like, you read the hard news, but then you went to the funny papers and you looked at the sports section and then you wanted to have some relaxation and you wanted to, kind of get away and, look at the feature story type thing.
Yeah, kind of the idea of it was that you wouldn't just read it and throw it away on Sunday. You'd keep it around for the week, And,
Yeah, right. That's great. So you had a chance to really, meet some interesting people, right? You interviewed some big-time stars.
Oh yeah, I did. We also covered summer theater on the Cape, so I interviewed a lot of people down there, and I interviewed some of the old movie stars like Myrna Loy and Joan Fontaine, and I interviewed Johnny Carson up in Boston at the Somerset Hotel.
Wow.
I interviewed quite a few musicians. I covered the Newport Jazz Festival and the Newport Folk Festival every year, so yeah, I met some pretty interesting people.
So what was it like for you when you actually had a chance to meet somebody that was a big-time person like that? Did you feel like excited? Did you feel a little intimidated? What was your thought?
Well, it was kind of both. You get excited about it. I always did a lot of research if I had the time to, because I didn't like to do just question and answer. I tried to have a conversation with a person, But yeah, some people could. Buddy Rich, I interviewed Buddy Rich.
Oh,
and
really?
He was intimidating, I'll say that. And I had heard about him in advance, and I knew he was going to be tough, But
Yeah, right.
nevertheless, I enjoyed it. He was a funny guy. He did he performed at Dartmouth High School. It was some kind of fundraiser, and so they did the first set, and Buddy Rich got up to the microphone. He announced we're taking a break, and he said, "I've been told by the principal of the school I have to tell you that there's no smoking on school grounds, but the way I feel is if you like it, smoke it." I mean, that was Buddy Rich.
Yeah, right. He definitely was like an edgy kind of guy. But then when he went into one of those drum roll riffs, he was second to none.
Yeah, he was incredible.
Yeah, and he's actually inspired a lot of people, too, over the years.
Yeah.
Well, tell me how you got involved in the whole sports historian thing. After you left the Standard Times, that would have been, what, in the late 60s, early 70s?
Yeah, actually, I started when I was at the Standard Times. I wrote a book. I got an agent in New York, a guy named Max Gartenberg, and I had an idea for a book explaining to pro football fans how to watch football and how the week went for a team practicing and so forth. So I sent him an outline, and he couldn't sell that idea, but he talked to a publisher along the way, Hawthorne Books, and they were looking for somebody to do a who was who in American sports. And so Max, brought up my name, and I agreed to do it for them. And that was my first book. That's like a collection of 1,500 obituaries, basically. And
Well, you shouldn't look at it that way.
well, that's what it was,
I'll actually have it right here. I'm just going to kind of hold it up, even though it's far away right there. There it is. Kind of see through it because we got our CGI graphics in the background, but it's called the Pro Football Fan's Companion, How to Watch the Game Like an Expert. And I see all kinds of formations here and stuff like that. Our own Chops Turner, he was a big-time football guy.
Yeah.
He was a mean defensive guy, too. So he,
I
I've heard all
believe
about
that,
that, but all the different formations over here and how to watch it, because I think even myself, I've been watching football for a long time, but, if you're a casual fan, you're probably missing half of what's going on. I mean, until you really break it down and know the positions and the assignments and everything that each person was supposed to do, I think a lot of people miss half of what's happening.
Yeah, well, you
That's why you wrote that book.
you don't need to know more than you want to know, but if you want to know it, it's there. So,
Hey, who's the greatest quarterback of all time, do you think?
well, I'd have to go way back to Otto Graham.
Otto Graham, all right, okay,
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah.
See, I was thinking Brady, and that guy over there was thinking Montana, and so Otto Graham's a good choice. Different game back then, too.
Well, I didn't want to alienate anybody here in the studio, so.
Well, those guys back then, right, they protect the quarterbacks now. Those guys took a beating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Graham actually still holds the record for most yards per pass attempt, which which I think is the real measure of a quarterback. You know?
Yeah. Now, you also wrote a book called Vagabond Halfback,
Yeah.
right? The Saga of Johnny Blood. And this is a gentleman that played back for the Green Bay Packers and so forth. And Johnny Blood, I mean, that makes you a little nervous just hearing that name. This guy must have been mean.
Well, he wasn't really mean.
No?
And Johnny Blood was not his real name. His real name was John McNally.
Right.
I had, you know, growing up in Green Bay and sitting in the press box with my dad, I heard so many stories about this guy from former players and former coaches that when I was probably about 12 or 13, I kind of said to myself, well, someday I'm going to write a book about him if nobody else does in the meantime. So when it came after my first book was published in 1971, that was the Who Was Who, I figured now I had some credentials to approach him with. So I wrote him a letter. He lived in St. Paul, Minnesota at the time. His real name was John McNally, John Victor McNally. I wrote him a letter and I told him about my background and the fact that I had just had this book published. And I said, I'd really like to work with you on a biography. And I remember very clearly, I mailed that letter on Tuesday afternoon at the downtown post office in New Bedford. And Sunday afternoon, I get a phone call, and this voice says, Ralph Hickok, I'm John McNally. You know me as Johnny Blood. So I'm very excited that he got back to me so fast. And then he said, I'm parked in front of the Standard Times. How do I get to your house from here?
Wow.
So he had
incredible.
got my letter, bought a plane ticket to Boston, and rented a car in Boston, and drove down to New Bedford just like that. So,
You must have been amazed that he responded to the
oh,
letter like
yeah,
that.
I couldn't believe it.
Because you're probably thinking it's probably a Hail Mary a little bit, right?
Oh, yeah,
And then all of a
exactly,
sudden
yeah.
he's there, right?
Yeah, yeah. So,
So this book right here, I can tell by speaking to you about it, you really love writing this book, right?
oh yeah, it was fun. It was fun to research. It was fun to write. We traveled around. We traveled what I think of as the Johnny Blood Trail: Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan.
Yeah.
I even interviewed his first grade teacher. So in
Wow.
the process, we spent 4 days at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I interviewed George Halas, Red Grange, Ernie Nevers, Art Rooney, the founder of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and several other people. And,
Johnny Blood was able to get you in there, right?
yeah, yeah, that's a
You got to know people in high places sometimes,
yeah,
right, Ralph?
well, yeah, that's a funny story. I had to interview Art Rooney because Johnny Blood had been the player coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers for 3 years, so I had to interview Art Rooney about that. And so when we got to Canton, Ohio for the Hall of Fame, we found out that Art Rooney was not going to be there for very long. He was going to come in just before the induction ceremony, and then he'd be at a reception for Pro Football Hall of Fame members, then he'd be flying out. So I said to John, I'm not going to have time to interview him. There's just not going to be any opportunity. And John said, well, you can interview him at the reception. And I said, but I can't do that because that's Hall of Fame members only. John said, oh, don't worry about it. So we went to this reception, and we're about to go into the room, and there's a security guy there, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, I'm sorry, sir, this is green badges only. I had a yellow badge, a yellow media badge, and only members of the Hall of Fame had the green badges. So he's not going to let me in. So John turned to him and he said, you mean you're not going to let my son come in with me? And the guy said, I'm sorry. He looked at his badge and he said, I'm sorry, Mr. McNally, but I have orders, green badges only. And he said, so are you going to tell George Halas and Red Grange and Art Rooney that I'm not there because you wouldn't let my son in? So the guy said, well, okay, you can go in, go ahead. So I got in, I interviewed Art Rooney, and just as the thing was winding down, a back door to this room opened, and the commissioner of the National Football League, Pete Rozelle, stepped in and gave a little speech thanking people for being there and so forth. And John nudged me and he said, you and Pete Rozelle are the only guys in the room who don't have green badges.
That's amazing. And of course, Pete Rozelle ended up going on to become one of the great commissioners in NFL history.
Yeah, no,
so you were in the room with all these Hall of Famers. What was that like?
Oh, it was fun. It was kind of an interesting phenomenon I noticed, though, is that they kind of split up by decades. The older guys would gather in a group, and then the guys from the 50s and 60s would be in another group, and they didn't talk to one another. It's kind of weird to me.
You know what it is? Because they were like, hey, remember when you made that catch? And, they would reminisce about the great plays that they made, probably.
Oh, yeah.
That's what happened. Well, you also wrote an encyclopedia, and this is one that I know you're very proud of. It's called the Encyclopedia of North American Sports History. Can you believe this? Look at this thing. I mean, this is like unbelievable. To actually have written a book this deep and, with this much meticulousness. I mean, it's just, look at this stuff. I mean, that's the second edition.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What does it take to write an encyclopedia like that?
Well, it's research, a lot of research, and kind of interesting. The first edition of that book came out in 1992. The publisher is Facts on File, and I went to New York for about a week, and I spent every day in the New York Public Library, and I spent a lot of time at the Boston Public Library. I was going through New York Times microfilm at the New Bedford Library, and so I visited halls of fame, and so there was just a lot of physical effort involved in doing that. And when I did the second edition 10 years later, which was a big revision, a lot happened in between, I did all the research online. I just sat at my computer, never left my study, basically.
That's one good thing about the modern technology, right?
Oh, yeah, and I think it probably took about 6 months to do the revised edition. It took almost 2 years to do the original.
There aren't that many people that can say that they've written a lot of books like this, especially with sports, where, people really enjoy sports. It's fun.
Yeah, it was, when I started, there weren't many reference books to work with. And the research, when I did that first book, the Who Was Who in American Sports, research for that was really difficult. It was almost all newspaper microfilm, because there just weren't any books available to consult. And now there's much, much more. Now it's a whole field. You can major in sports history. Yeah,
right. We like to mention the people. Let us know where you're watching from. We got someone from Westminster, South Carolina, checking in tonight, saying hello to Ralph Hickok. So let us know where you're watching from. Say hello to Ralph, a very, very interesting individual here with a deep wealth of knowledge when it comes to journalism.
I know those people in Westminster, South Carolina.
Yeah, that's right, the Campbells, right?
Yeah.
All right, good. That's glad they're checking in tonight.
Hi, Ed and Steffi.
Yeah, right, there you go. Now look at this right here. We have a book about Fairhaven that you wrote. Now this is another book, A Lens on History, all about the great town of Fairhaven right over here. So how did you end up writing something like this, a little bit different?
Well, after I left the Standard Times, I worked at Southeastern Advertising Agency downtown, and the president of the agency was Milt George, who lived in Fairhaven. And Milt, after he retired, started something called the Fairhaven Heritage Center, which was almost like a hall of fame of people who had lived in Fairhaven. And so he asked me to write a book that would kind of publicize that and also raise some money. And I really didn't want to do it. I fought the idea for a long time because I just didn't like the idea of stringing together a whole bunch of biographies. But finally, when I thought about it, I saw a way I could do it by organizing various chapters, and like there's a chapter about business and industry, and how I could also tie what was going on in Fairhaven to what was happening in the nation and in the world. So that's why the title is A Lens on History. I took Fairhaven as a way of looking at the broader history.
Well, sometimes an idea comes up that maybe you're thinking, well, I'm not sure about this, but then once you get into it, right?
Oh, yeah. Once you get into it, it becomes very interesting. And it's like if you read something, and you want to read more about it,
Right.
that's the way research is often. You can really go down rabbit holes, just finding more and more stuff. Some of it not even relevant to what you're doing, but just because it's interesting.
What about the state of journalism now? I mean, things have changed so much. I mean, in the old days, everybody got news out of that newspaper. Editors kind of screened it, make sure it was accurate, make sure it was good sources and so forth. And now it's just things are thrown out there from all over the place without anybody checking sources. How do you view that?
Yeah, it's really a difficult time, and I know I think in small communities the newspapers hold up pretty well, from what I know, but in the larger ones, places, newspapers like the New York Times still continue to do fairly well. But the medium-sized newspapers are really taking a beating, and that includes the Standard Times. I mean, they lost so much local advertising.
Right. And there's not really a lot you can do about it, really. I mean, you can be digital and so forth, but
Yeah.
it's really tough to get back to the way it was before.
Yeah, it'll never go back. The thing I think goes almost unnoticed is that the classified advertising got killed by Craigslist.
Right.
Basically, and that was a staple of your typical newspaper.
Well, I remember the real estate section used to be
Oh,
this big,
yeah.
gigantic thing, and now people just go online when they want to
Yeah, right.
either
Yeah.
sell or buy a
And-
house or
and-
something like that.
And so if you don't have the advertising revenue coming in, it makes it hard to hire people.
A guy like you, Ralph, right? I just have a feeling that you're not done yet. You always got some idea of something that you're working on in the future. Anything you're thinking about as we proceed along?
Well, actually, I have an immediate project. There's a book being done by McFarland Publishing about Milwaukee County Stadium.
Another book?
Well, I'm not writing that book, but they asked me to write a chapter about the Packers because the Packers played there for 41 years. I think
I
it
didn't
was.
even know that because I remember the Milwaukee Brewers there, but I didn't know that the Packers were there.
Oh, yeah.
No
Yeah, the
kidding.
Packers used to play 3 games a year in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And I went to, I guess, about the first 10 of those games
Wow.
before I went to college. And I've also been working, actually, it's more for, I guess, my kids and grandkids than anything else. I've been working on a book, a lot of family memories and, personal memories and things.
Yeah, right. You like the old arenas better, like the Yankee stadiums, the Wrigley Fields, or do you like the new stadiums that are all real state-of-the-art and all that stuff?
Well, I kind of like the older ones.
Yeah.
And
Well, I actually like the Boston Garden, believe it or not.
Oh, yeah.
It had, with all its flaws, it did have sort of a charm to it.
oh yeah, that was an interesting place. That, of course, they they had the leprechauns under the tile floor.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. Yeah, right. Yeah, and the Celtics always got the bounce. And,
Oh, yeah, sure.
The Bruins are always tough to play there, and so it had a great history.
What I didn't like or don't like are the multi-sport stadiums, because that
Right.
Milwaukee County Stadium is an example. It was built for baseball, and it was just awful for football.
And you don't even see that anymore. Now everybody has their own stadium,
Yeah,
football, baseball.
Now they've gone back. They've gone away from that multi-sports thing, which I think is good.
All right, I know you got a lot of great family around, your daughters, Stephanie, who I think is watching tonight, Holly, and also, how many grandchildren you have?
15,
And how many kids?
7.
7 kids, and a lot of the grandchildren are,
And I have 2 great-grandchildren.
and how many of the grandchildren are female?
11, and both great-grandchildren are girls. So
Wow, isn't that something?
girl power.
It's supposed to be 50-50, chance when you're throwing the dice there, but
Well,
that's the way it is. It's fantastic. What a big family you have.
yeah, and they're all great kids too. I'm very proud of all of them. So,
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, you are a fascinating gentleman, a very interesting gentleman, somebody who's so accomplished in the area of journalism. You have all these books and all that history with the newspaper, and have covered news and sports, and have talked to a lot of artists and celebrities, and what a great career you've had and are continuing to have as you deal with Milwaukee County Stadium. Really appreciate you stopping by to chat with us tonight.
Glad to hear it, Paul. I enjoyed it.
How about this guy, Ralph Hickok, huh?
And I brought all three of my fans with me.
Yeah, that's All right, we are back on the Paul Santos Show. Glad to have you looking in here tonight. We're always looking to do things a little bit different and try different stuff. As you know, we like to have our so-called interview guest, but then we also like to go to some music. So you're going to look over here and you're going to see our very own Chops Turner along with Mr. Glenn Nunes right here. There he is, Glenn Nunes. Well, you know, Glenn is a guy that, you know, when we have an idea, we like, hey, you know, we have an idea for something that we want to do, and we always bounce that off of Glenn and Chops and all that, but Glenn always has a way of coming through in the clutch, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Sort of like that cleanup hitter, you know, like he's comes up at the bottom of the ninth with 2 outs, we go to, you know, Chops and Mr. Clutch over here, Glenn Nunes, so we're ready to go.
We all know that people are the same everywhere that you go. There are good and bad in everyone. We learn to live when we learn to give each other what we need to survive. Together alive, ebony and ivory live together in perfect harmony. Side by side on my piano keyboard. Oh Lord, why don't we? Side by side on my piano keyboard. Oh Lord, why don't we? Ebony, ivory, living in perfect harmony.
Come on, Paul.
Ebony, ivory, living in perfect harmony. Ebony,
Ivory,
and ivory,
perfect harmony.
living in perfect harmony.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen, thank you.
Good job.
Oh, you know, hey, you guys are, people don't know that you guys just learned that like an hour ago, right? And that is not the easiest song to sing, but you guys pulled it off. But
Thank
it
you.
wasn't easy. And I know you guys, you know, put it together. But we want to do that for a reason because, you know, we're going through all these difficult times.
right.
And Chops and I talk about all the time. We just want people to get together and get
right.
on the same page. We can solve these problems that we have.
That's right.
We just got to pull ourselves together and do it. So I remember that song, you know, the great Stevie
Yes,
Wonder
right.
and, of course, Paul McCartney of the Beatles. They came out with that song in the 80s.
right.
And it took off like
Took off, oh,
wildfire.
yeah.
You know what I
It's
mean?
one of the big hits.
So
Big
it
hit.
was a great big hit. So good.
So you saw him this with what's her name?
Yeah,
Celeste?
Colleen.
Colleen.
Yeah, do you know Colleen?
Well, I seen him.
Saturday.
Play, so you
Saturday.
see him Saturday. So he lowered the standards today.
Get out of here. This guy's too much. This guy.
No,
we go way back. We go way
no, I
back.
wouldn't say that, but
Nah, man, he's
but,
good.
but I do give Colleen the slight edge.
Looking forward to that. Big
Yeah.
wedding coming up August 15th.
But we also want to talk about enough is enough, right? One day I'm talking to Chops on the phone, right? So I'm like, so Chops, what are you up to tomorrow? He goes, oh, I'm going down to New York City. I'm like, really, New York City? It's pretty good. The Big Apple and everything. I was, oh yeah, I'm gonna cut a little video down
Yeah,
there, you know.
yeah.
So you met up these gentlemen. They're called Trifecta. Now, how do you know the gentleman from Trifecta?
Well, me and Q, we go way back. We met in the studio many years ago. I was recording with Mr. Green. Remember Mr. Green? I was recording with Mr. Green in the studio, and he's working in another studio. And we heard all these hip hop going on. I said, well, let me see what this guy, man. He was in there doing. I said, wow,
Yeah.
this guy knows a beat master. So he knows how to put the beats together in hip hop. And we became good friends, man.
Wow.
And he's a phenomenal beat master, man. So we worked on songs in between that, and he called me up one day at 11:30 at night. Said, this guy, oh, this Big Q, what's up, man? I need you here, man. We got a hot song. We want to put it out. We need you here to put the hook on it. I rode all the way down to Worcester and recorded. I didn't get home till about 6 o'clock in the morning. We recorded.
Wow.
Oh yeah. And he said it's going to take about 30 minutes, and we put the hook together, and there comes the song.
So it's actually shot in New York City?
Actually, the video was shot in New York. Yeah.
If you go to YouTube
Yeah.
and you put Chops Turner,
Yeah.
Enough is Enough.
Yeah.
And
Trifecta.
it's all about Black Lives
Yeah.
Matter and that kind of thing, and people are
Right.
singing and rapping, and you're
Right.
coming down the street.
Right.
And Chops, you know, he does the chorus. And he's got this, you got this, you got this
Swag.
whole thing going down. I got to tell
Jag, the swag, Jag.
I got the jag and the swag.
Chops really brought that baby home, I'll tell you right now. So yeah, the voices, but you know, the thing that I noticed is you know when something's shot in top quality. I mean, this thing was high definition, and I had it on my on a big screen TV, and I'm like, wow, this thing
His
is top
brother
notch
is
quality.
a videographer, man.
Yeah, right.
He's got those cameras, man. He came in from New Jersey.
Yeah.
And he had always scoped out the city where we took the shots. You know, man, it was phenomenal. Man,
Yeah,
and,
so again, trifecta, you can type in Chops Turner, Enough is Enough, and it's about 4 minutes long, and it's a great video.
yeah,
So,
great video.
well, John Keller is out there in the audience. He says, I want the next book. I want to get the next book. You already got people buying the next book.
Right. I want the encyclopedia, man.
You know, I think Chops Turner could write a book, couldn't he? I think he could write a book.
with his own.
Yeah, we got a book.
Yeah. Matter of fact, we're discussing that.
yeah? I bet you could, you know, being out on the road
yeah,
and being a musician and so forth. And
50 years. Almost
50 years?
I didn't even think you were 50 years old.
Oh, yeah.
He started when he was 1 month old.
59. I'm your age.
Yeah, I know. I just turned 60. I can't believe it. I'm in
October
shock.
9th, I'll be 60.
I'm still in shock.
Yeah.
Oh, what are you gonna What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?
6-0, man.
I was telling my wife I'm in the 8th inning of a 9-inning game.
Oh, boy.
No, but we're hoping for extra innings. Extra innings. All right, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our guest, the gentleman over there, Mr. Ralph Hickok, for coming down tonight. We'd like to thank Glenn Nunes for coming through in the clutch. And, of course, this gentleman right here, Mr. Chops Turner. All right, well, next week, speaking of musicians, we have a gentleman who is from New Bedford, and he spent a lot of time in Nashville. Jimmy James is going to be here. I think you guys know Jimmy James.
I know Jimmy.
So that's going to be a lot of fun. We'd like to thank Josh Souza, producer-director, Justin Pereira, our associate producer. And I'm Paul Santos. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next week. Good night and be safe.